Well, that's from our collaboration with Channels TV, of course, giving us the scoop on this matter. The interesting bit in there, for the first time since 1999, we have another contender in the person of Peter Obi, like he mentioned, former governor of Anambra State, who is representing the Labour Party and has come out as quite a force. The other interesting bit, whoever secures the most votes would only become president if that person also secured 25% of two-thirds of the votes from Nigeria's 36 states. And that gives you quite a picture of how different their electoral system is. But joining us for this conversation this morning, we have Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante. He's a political scientist, also the director for the Center for European Studies at the University of Ghana. He joins the conversation. Dr. Asah-Asante, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, my brother. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for joining the conversation. Let's start.
And good morning to our sister country, Nigeria. I wish them all the best.
Awesome. We do wish them. In fact, that is a nation very close to my heart, apart from Ghana, that is. I've spent quite a bit of time in that country. But let's talk about the Nigerian elections 2023. How important are these elections in the life of Nigeria, especially in this republic?
Yeah, if you look at Nigerian election, has always been an important election because talk about numbers, all right? It is the most populous country in Africa in terms of economic, wherewithal. Nigeria is big. In terms of military might, Nigeria is big. And by all definition, Nigeria is big, all right? So anything about Nigeria is big to Africa, big to the sub-region, big to the world. And given the fact that all these countries, including Nigeria, have gone through military regimes for a very long time, until such a time that democracy, through the third wave, has started gaining some roots. So every election on the continent, in the sub-region, and in this case in Nigeria, is critical and important to all of us because we want democracy to be strengthened. We want democracy to grow so that at least, if anything at all, we are going to get the fruits of democracy and make sure that our sub-region, our continent is free from all the evils of authoritarian regimes. So Nigerian election, by all standards, is so critical and so important, and it is an enterprise worth pursuing wherever we find ourselves as human beings.
Thank you for that background. I'll be coming to you shortly, but let me also bring in Ikemesit Effiong, Head of Research at SBM Intelligence. Ikemesit, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining the conversation. I can't hear you. I think you may have to unmute.
Oh, okay. All right then. Good morning and thank you for having me.
Great, great. And if I butchered your name, this would be an apt time for you to correct me.
It was the same first. I'll allow you pass.
Okay. So let's get into where exactly do you find yourself currently? I want to know so we can situate the conversation. And what can you share with us from Saturday till now? INEC has told us about preparations. It has shown us footage, pictures of, electoral documents and all of that it has had ready for the elections. But on election day in many places, I remember the WTO boss, Dr. Ngozi, went and voted. And where she voted, it took over 3 hours before voting started. This was replicated in a few other places, but voting did go on, and the numbers that turned out, massive, some of those the highest we have seen within this period since 1999. But what is the latest that you can tell us in respect of the Nigerian election?
Okay, so I'm currently in Lagos, Nigerian marshal, and I think really the story of the election. First, I should say, collation and some results, right? I started filtering through some states already being called in terms of where the presidential contest currently stands right now. The establishment party candidates, I think, have at least 3 states, and right now, counting a lot of collation will happen today. So by the end of today, we would have a much clearer idea about whether there's a first round winner in this election cycle, or if might be staring at the possibility of a second round. But really, in the end, I think the story of this election has really been one about INEC's logistical challenges. Just as you alluded to, Ngozi Okola waited for hours before she was able to vote. I believe that was in Anambra State. Um, According to our own tally at SBM Intelligence, which we released on Saturday, 6% of the polling units that we monitored didn't open on time, and were delays in ballot materials, as well as polling unit officers getting to the various polling units right across the country. I have reports from uh, even the nation's capital, where people voted well into the night, right? For our regions, for example, said at 12:25 a.m. in one of the suburbs, right, of the national capital. And voting had to be extended, right? And for voting had to be extended, right, in about 16 Nigerian states well into Sunday, right? And that just underscores the fact that despite the years of preparation that INEC has had, despite the copious amounts of financial support that they got out of the federal court, and earlier appearance here on your channel, I think we put up those graphics and those numbers about what INEC spending has been. In this cycle alone, INEC allocated 355 billion naira. I don't know how much that is CDs, but it's a tidy penny in order to manage this electoral contest. And it appears as though for every election management metric that you look at, right, INEC performed. And we are looking at a situation where, even though lots of people showed up at their polling units, many of them may not have had the opportunity to actually cast their ballots. Initial indications are that official turnout numbers are in the mid 30%, which is putting us on course to match, voter turnout totals from the last election in 2019, which is a record low for a Nigerian election, I should add. Uh, but we think that that's indicative of, actual voter interest, which we actually thought was quite high in this cycle. But all of those logistical challenges, also there were technical glitches with some of the accreditation machines in a lot of polling units spread right across the country as well. That also hampered voting right in terms of polling units. So I think the dominant story in this cycle has just been that from a logistical standpoint, INEC did not put its best foot forward, and it appears as though many Nigerians may have been operationally disenfranchised as a result.
Right. When you look at the signals so far, I have seen the Western media, among others, purporting that Peter Obi, the former Anambra State governor, was in pole position if the youth turned out in their numbers to lead the country. Has that been the case in terms of the voter turnout that you speak of?
So we don't have quantitative data yet to sort of to give a very accurate picture, right, around what the demographic turnout has been in this particular elections. Anecdotally, it would appear as though voting is high across demographics, but also particularly with respect to the security of Nigeria's electorate, right? So people under the age of 34. I think the post-mortem on that turnout would really only begin to occur after sort of all the numbers have come in and we have a very clear idea of who exactly voted in this cycle. I suppose my primary concern as a researcher statistician is that because of operational challenges, many people who initially showed up at polling units and waited hours, but eventually probably had to leave, or the polling officers had to suspend him for the day. And then if your polling unit was open on Sunday, many people not taking the opportunity to come means that in the end, women have added a picture, right, about how voting interest and voter appetite and people actually showing up at polling units translated into actual votes, right? And really at the end of this, I'll give you sort of a quick example. So one of the states that has been called right now the presidential election contest is Katsina State. If you're fit in Nigerian politics, you know that that's the home state of the current president, the People's Democratic presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar has been called as winning that state.
Right.
So that's a significant flip, from sort of the ruling party column to the opposition column. But his total vote share was about 400, a little over 400,000 votes.
Okay.
When
so Ike
President Buhari won that state
pardon my having to do this, Ike.
Okay.
Pardon my having to do this. We have another guest who has to take leave of us. So with your permission, I would just move on to Dr. Asa Asante briefly, and I'll come back to you. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Thank you. Dr. Asa Asante, my apologies. I know you have a class to get to. When you look at the Nigerian elections, we've spoken about the importance of it, how crucial it is for our sub-region and the entire African continent. But what do you make of the developments so far, the positive and the negative? How well has INEC, fared for you this time round? And when you look at the late start to voting in some areas, the violence that has characterized elections in some areas, ballot boxes snatched, what picture does it paint for you from the political standpoint? And what are your expectations going forward? Hello, Dr. Asa Asante.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello? Did you get the question?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you get the question?
Yes, I got the question.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I do. If you look at the election, it has suffered a number of challenges, as my colleague Ike has already enumerated them. Issue of the pre-election phase, we've seen issue of violence, we've seen issues of security problems, logistical problems, and a host of other problems. For instance, if you look at Labour Party's candidates, some of them did not have their names on the ballot, but that has been cleared, that the party refused to submit their names, and that is the cause of that. But the issues of, election management problems have reared their ugly heads, and that's creating a problem for the election, the late start of the election and all that. These things go a long way to affect election one way or the other, where people, if you read BBC reports, they've been in queues for a very long time and the rest of them. But the good news is also that people have the tenacity for purpose. They'll be able to, stand there and then cast their ballots. They've been able to also get themselves in the process. And then the INEC is also working very hard that some of the lingering challenges, it's addressing them. Issues of accusation, they quickly issue a press release like the Labour Party issue, and the rest of them. If you look at all these things, you realize that I am hoping that the election will be free and fair, and that people will be able to exercise their franchise as it's supposed to be. And then, so now we are in the election phase where voting is going on, counting is going on. I believe that we are not going to experience any incident. Already some of the polling stations, there have been shootings and all that. We believe that the security will be able to deal with this. And then when we get to the post-election phase, we want to pray and hope that there will also be peace prevailing there. if you look at so far what has transpired, I believe that if everything goes on well, we are going to see interesting elections. Even though the polls have suggested that there's a three-horse race between APC and PDP and Labour Party. But if you look at some of the polls, they put Obi on top because they believe that he commands a lot of large following in terms of the youth. If you look at the Nigerian youth, for instance, between age of 0 to 17, they have about 107 million people. If you look at the ages between 18 and 35, they have 59 million. Put the two together, it gives you an idea about 166 million people. You move on to 36, the age bracket of 36 to 53, they have about 32 million people. Even if you put the two together, you are running about 198 million against, eligible voters of about 87 million people. So you realize that those statistics are worth interrogating, because if the youth are to vote the way the predictions are going, then it should be a victory for, Labour Party Obi. But there are also the disbelief that it's fairly a new party and that is not able to marshal forces within the highly Islamized society of the North, where most of the votes that you need to be able to win a Nigeria election exist. So that is the challenge that you have. For the two candidates of Tinubu, APC, yes, he is the goddess of the southern area of the southwest region. And if you look at his showing and the recent BBC report a few minutes ago, that he's winning there, but the magnitude of victory, which is not that high, because we expect that in such areas, those two, like the APC man and the PDP man, should be able to have a lot, because the youth, if the youth dynamics is going to work, then it's going to divide the votes of these two people and then create a problem for them. So we expect that they'll put in their best and then get the results that we want. But I believe that it's early days yet, and that as the counting goes on, we are likely to see changes that will really inform us as to the focus and direction of the election. My prayer is that the security must be up and doing, which I'm sure they are on the ground and then doing the work as expected of them. And I also believe that, the election will move on freely and fairly, so as to enable people to exercise their franchise the way it ought to be. But obviously, in an election like this, with the large numbers of people involved, you cannot gloss over the fact that there will be some aberrations that will come. But we want it to be minimal, so that Nigeria will be able to weather the storm and that we don't have a repeat of the 2007 election with all the attendant problems.
Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante, I'm sure that we'll have further opportunities to dilate on this matter. We know you have to run, but we're grateful that you've taken the time all the same to discourse with us on this all-important subject. And we wish you the best of the day, sir. Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante is a political science lecturer at the University of Ghana, also director of the Center for European Studies. Before I come back to you, Ike, we know from last night the BBC had been putting up some data of the latest electoral results, and we're talking about since last night, so this is not the very latest, but so far, per what the BBC has gathered in terms of live results, from a few hours ago, Bola Tinubu had secured about 65.38% of the votes, amounting to some 201,494. Just a drop in a bucket in terms of the numbers, about 93 million registered and over 84 million gunning to vote. So that is just a drop in a bucket. 29.06% for Atiku Abubakar, a perennial contender with 89,000 plus votes. And Peter Obi with 3.7% with 11,397. Then all the others put together 1.77%, amounting to some 5,462. And we also had Rabiu, another major businessman in the country, Rabiu Kwankwaso, with 0.09%, constituting some 264 votes. But mind you, the voting that has come out so far emanates from Bola Tinubu's strongholds, his areas, and that could also account for the numbers that we are seeing. But in terms of the votes distribution, like you can see, Bola Tinubu with 65 plus percent, Atiku Abubakar with 29 plus percent, Peter Obi with 3.7%, and the others with some 1.77%, apart from Rabiu Kwankwaso, who has 0.09%. Let me come now to Ike. So we heard, and thank you so much for holding for us. We heard Dr. Asa Asante make mention of the numbers across the board in terms of Nigeria's population. But when you narrow it down, you would see that the youth element, the voting element, the qualification, 18 to 34, you're looking at over 37 million Nigerians. Then you're looking at the middle-aged constituency, over 33 million Nigerians. Then you come to the elderly groups, from 50 to 69, over 17 million, and then those above 70 years amounting to 5.2 million. But when you look at the youthful bracket, 37 million for those 18 to 34 and middle-aged 35 to 49, that would give you some 70 million plus voters. And this is the constituency that has fed into the Peter Obi narrative. What is the picture in Nigeria, and how do you feel this will reflect in this election?
So I think the first thing to recognize is that, while the honest four elements, right, certainly skews significant votes, Peter Obi and the Labour Party, it's by no means a homogeneous block from a voter attitude perspective. And with this, we've done some election studies, right, in this cycle, and what you find is that the youth vote is actually quite diverse. So the upper percentile of that 18 to 34 distribution is where you see a lot of the contextual divide, right? Nigeria's political space really come into play. Right? There's some much more younger distribution, right, of that demographic, sort of wage and category is where sort of a lot of the potential will be voting, demographic, right, is housed. It's still, a few million people. I think it's in this cycle you had 10 million plus people who registered, right, for the first time. And out of those, almost 6 million of those, right, were within that teen to 34 demographic, right? So it's a very significant part of the voting electorate. Again, what's not very clear is how, and now a lot of those voters are first-time voters, or they are at best voting in the election cycle. And what has typically been sort of our observation, and we actually have some data, right, to corroborate this, is that, voting difficulties in voting, and especially election delays, right, tend to impact, veteran voters, so people who have voted in 2 to 3 and above election cycles, because they kind of have a baked-in expectation. They kind of know what to expect come election day, and they're often prepared for that. The data isn't very clear on how much younger voters, right, have in the lead up to the elections, how they were going to handle, delays, and sort of post-election day, how they actually handled, right. We do have anecdotal evidence that then we're able to stick it through. But we don't know how much of that voting base that originally showed up at their first, those who should how many showed up at their polling units, and then for those who showed up at their polling units, how many of them were able to ride through 5, 6, 7, in some cases 8-hour delays before they got their ballots and they were able to cast them. And that, I suppose, will be the interesting story of this election is written. The Labour Party is already complaining. They were actually the party complaining about how sort of INEC's logistical challenges may have impacted the election, and they called loudly for for the extension of voting beyond sort of the 3 p.m. cutoff mark, which was originally earmarked on election day. INEC eventually obliged and actually extended voting well into Sunday in some polling units right across the country. But I'm just checking in with I was checking in with my colleagues right as the professor was speaking. And the Labour Party as well as the People's Democratic Party have literally just finished giving a press conference on national television, and they are still making those complaints. And so there's real anxiety and there's real concern, right? Certainly on the political side, that those issues in getting electoral materials into as many polling units as possible, and sort of expediting the process, and the technical challenges with the bimodal accreditation system, right? Impacted real and actual turnout, and to my mind, I would not be surprised if a lot of the legal challenges that occur when we have all the results in post-election sort of hinge on this particular, point, right, around election legends.
Do you foresee that those electoral challenges, and we've seen some of them in the past, those legal challenges could lead to a rerun, especially on the back of how dire the situation has been in some parts? You mentioned that voting was extended. I heard 2:30 mentioned at a point in time, and that anyone in the queue would be allowed to vote. Then 3 o'clock was made mention of, and in some areas extended all the way to Sunday. Yet the complaints still remain. And when you look at the numbers, it does make sense. Could this lead to a legal hurdle for whoever is declared president at the end of the day?
Oh, I think it almost certainly will. I think even if the electoral process was managed more competently, right, and we saw less disruptions from an operational and a logistical, and even from a security standpoint. I suppose one minor footnote from election day was that election day violence, right, is down compared to 2019, and so that is a good development, I would say. Even if this electoral exercise was well managed, you were going to see legal challenges anyway. I suppose why next conduct of this election is that it has created a very definitive casus belli for for aggrieved candidates and aggrieved political parties to take up these matters. And in the courts, we have said, we have flagged possibility in research in the past, and we have said that if show elements in this election cycle would actually be the performance of the judiciary and its holds, and there are important concerns on the back of recent election petition decisions, especially with some of the off-cycle state races, that judiciary may not be sufficiently independent or sufficiently impartial, or they may not sufficiently apprise themselves of all of the various main parts from a legal perspective in terms of how our electoral law is supposed to work, in order for them to issue decisions that would actually be seen as impartial and dispassionate. Yeah, so in the end, this election will largely turn on how INEC did it and how the courts assessed INEC's behavior, and I would not be surprised if reruns are called in certain polling units, in some cases in whole wards. There's a particular situation, for example, on Saturday in Delta State, where an entire voting district in Warri, which is one of the main and port cities here in Nigeria, didn't hold throughout election day Some, voting happened on Sunday, but it's not immediately clear that voting happened in all the units in, I believe it's Warri South Senatorial District. And that's huge talk. And we're talking, almost 100,000, right, voters at this point, right? And so I would not be surprised if reruns called in specific race. We already know, for example, that INEC will conduct a supplementary election in Enugu senatorial district where the Labour Party senatorial candidate, right, was reportedly killed. And to election day, no voting really happened there on the I think there would be some court imposed and court mandated reruns, right, scattered around the country. The question would be one, how many of those will be called by the courts? Two, how long will it take for the court to make those determinations? So you may have a situation where I is conducting and votes went into March. And then three, and more importantly, what is the quantum of votes that they hear and how material is it not only to the popular votes calculate in terms of who wins, overall, but also in the route to 24 calculus and how many of those candidates are able to secure the requisite 25% vote share in order to meet the constitutional bar for winning the election. If it is significant enough on both of those counts, then I think that you would hope for sort of election lawyers, election litigation, and maybe questions about the overall legitimacy of the outcome well into April.
Ike, very, very briefly on this. This is the last bit I'll put to you as we wrap the conversation. Now, in terms of the gubernatorial slot, in terms of the Senate, for example, people have said that the Labour Party has very little, chance of getting a number of those slots. If Peter Obi of the Labour Party did secure the necessary votes, and he also got 2/3 of, 25% of 2/3 of the states, Nigeria's 36 states, that would mean, and that would be 25% of 24 states, by the way. How would it be possible for him to manage the country without the Senate and the other institutions, without that force in those areas? Can you explain to us very briefly on that?
So it could shake out in one two ways. One, we have some anecdotal evidence that Peter Obi's magic dust may be rubbing off on some down ballot Labour Party candidates. So, for example, in Lagos, where I am now, one of the biggest senatorial districts, Etiosa, which roughly encompasses Ikoyi and Victoria Islands. So think all of those parts of Lagos that you see in Nollywood movies was won by a Labour Party candidate almost no one knew. And one of the candidates that he actually beat was a pop Nigerian musician, Banky Wellington of the People's Democratic Party. So some anecdotal evidence that the Labour Party may pick up some senatorial and House race here and there right across the country. The second bit has to do with if the Labour Party doesn't get enough of those votes, and go into more establishment and candidates. I think that Peter Obi may still have some points of and some form of leverage, even those candidates. So, if, for example, you are an EC or a PDP lawmaker, right, who is representing a senatorial district that voted heavily for Peter Obi, in theory, your constituents voted for the executive mandate. And if you're seen as being unusually obstructive of the president's government agenda, then chances are you may be walking on a real knife's edge in terms of how your constituents may view actual and your real mandate, over there at the National Assembly. And so Peter Obi may exploit sort of these sort of political avenues in order to, push through some of his governing agenda. But, the fundamental premise of your speech is that it would be a lot easier if Peter Obi has a legislative mandate by Nigerians also voting, right, for Labour Party candidates into the Senate, House Representatives, right? But there's certainly political, workarounds that he could utilize and shut. At the very least, is not presiding over, a gridlocked government. come May 2023, if he does, of course, win the whole thing.
And of course, from SBM Intelligence. We'll connect with you later as the elections progress to find out what the latest details are. But Ikemesit Effiong is head of research at SBM Intelligence. He joined us for a conversation. Well, moving on.